Planet of the Fakes Books, and Pig Star HH News. Josiah Henson, 1789–1883, John Lobb, 1840–1921, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, 1811–1896. Uncle Tom's Story of His Life. An Autobiography of the Rev. Josiah Henson, Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom. From 1789 to 1876. With a preface by Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe, and an introductory note by George Sturge, and S. Morley, Esq. M. P. London, Christian Age Office, 1876. Summary. Josiah Henson was born into slavery on June 15, 1789, in Charles County, Maryland, on a farm belonging to Francis Newman. Henson's parents' names are unknown. Separated from his father and siblings in early childhood, Henson was raised by his mother on the farm of Isaac Riley in Montgomery County, Maryland. As a young man, he became the superintendent of Riley's farm. He was attacked by a neighboring overseer at age 19 or 20 and for the rest of his life was unable to lift his arms above his head. At age 22, he married an enslaved woman from a neighboring plantation, whose name was Charlotte. The couple had 12 children. Riley transferred his slaves to his brother's plantation in Kentucky in 1825, and Henson lived there until he attempted to purchase his freedom in 1828. He was swindled out of $350 by his master and barely escaped being sold into New Orleans. Henson and his family escaped to Canada in 1830, and in 1838, he helped to found the Don Settlement for Fugitive Slaves, which operated a manual labor school and a sawmill. Henson traveled to England 3 times to raise money for the settlement, and he met Queen Victoria in 1877. After his first wife's death, Henson married Nancy Gamble, a widowed free black woman, in 1856. He died in Dresden, Ontario, on May 5, 1883. Part of the lands of the Don Settlement are now a historic site operated by the Ontario Heritage Trust and include the Henson family's home. This 1876 version of Henson's autobiography is the first of many editions issued by British editor John Lobb. It followed the original 1849 edition and a much expanded 1858 version, both published in Boston, as well as at least 2 other lesser-known reprints. Called almost entirely the work of John Lobb by historian Robin Winks, this version nevertheless is similar in phrasing to the American edition of 1858, up through the 23rd chapter, XXIII. Its most significant change is to the title page, which specifies that Henson is the Uncle Tom of Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel. Lobb made this claim enthusiastically in all his editions of Henson's autobiography, but Stowe herself stressed that her novel was not the biography of any one man. Winks, Blacks in Canada 193. A preface written by Stowe and first published in the 1858 version is reprinted here. The basic story of Henson's life in Uncle Tom's Story of His Life is similar to the version given in The Life of Josiah Henson. Henson is born on the farm of Francis Newman, to whom his mother had been hired out and to whom his father was enslaved. Henson's first significant memory is of his father returning home, with his head bloody, in fact his ear severed, and his back lacerated, having been whipped severely for defending his wife from a white overseer's rape attempt. p. 14. When his father is sold and taken to Alabama, his mother's master, Dr. Josiah McPherson, reclaims her and her 6 children. McPherson dies 2 or 3 years later, and his slaves are sold. Henson and his mother are briefly separated, but after he nearly dies, his new master, sells him cheap to Isaac Riley, the man who has bought his mother. p. 14. Henson grows up on Riley's farm. Strong and intelligent, he becomes a favorite of Riley's and during his teen years is made superintendent of the farm, practically overseer. p. 23. He raises crop production to more than double, and works long days overseeing the farm and taking its produce to market. p. 23. At 18, Henson experiences a conversion to Christianity and becomes a preacher among the slaves in his area. At age 19 or 20, Henson is badly injured when a neighboring overseer attacks him. From the time of this beating on, Henson cannot raise his arms above shoulder level. At age 22, Henson marries a woman named Charlotte, a slave from a neighboring farm. They have 12 children, 8 of whom survive. In 1825, a lawsuit against Isaac Riley causes him to fear losing his slaves. p. 42. He gives Henson a pass to conduct all of the slaves to his brother's plantation in Kentucky. The group passes the Ohio shore by boat during the journey and are told by onlookers that they are no longer slaves, but free men, if they chose to be so. p. 51. Henson's notions of right are against running away, and he looks forward to the immense admiration and respect with which Amos Riley will regard him when he arrives in Kentucky with the entire group of slaves. P. 52. He commands the group to keep going. Henson waits in Kentucky for 3 years for his master to arrive and becomes superintendent of Amos Riley's plantation. During this period he is also admitted as a preacher by the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1828, Henson hears that Isaac Riley will remain in Maryland and has decided to sell all his slaves other than Henson and his family. Henson says that his eyes are opened to the guilty madness of having earlier prevented the same people from acquiring freedom. P. 60. He asks permission to travel to Maryland to visit Isaac Riley. On the way he preaches in Ohio and gathers donations, and when he reaches Maryland, negotiates to purchase his freedom. Isaac Riley agrees, accepts a large down payment, and sends Henson back to Kentucky. However, he tells his brother that the remainder of the payment is $650 rather than the agreed upon $100. Neither brother plans to allow Henson to work off the sum and, swindled and frustrated, he returns to his normal labors. A year later, Riley sends Henson to New Orleans with his son, who has instructions to sell him. Henson has the opportunity to kill Riley's son and the crew before they reach New Orleans, but as he raises an axe above a sleeping young Amos Riley, he shrinks back and decides that it would be immoral. In New Orleans, Amos Jr. becomes seriously ill and asks Henson to take him home. When the two return to Kentucky, Henson concludes that the Riley brothers' theft of his money and attempt to sell him have voided his obligations to them, and with his wife and 4 children, he runs away, crossing the Ohio River in a skiff. Following a difficult journey on foot to Sandusky, Ohio, and then by water to Buffalo, New York, the family crosses to Canada on October 28, 1830. After 4 years of working for a farmer for shares and wages, Henson pools his earnings with those of other fugitive slaves in order to invest in land. In 1838, Henson and Hiram Wilson call a convention in order to establish a manual labor and grammar school, the British American Institute, to train up those who would afterwards instruct others, in order that the community might become independent of the white man for our intellectual progress. pp. 169-70. The institute opens in 1842 as part of the Don Settlement for fugitive slaves, located between Lake Erie and Lake Huron. The original version of Henson's autobiography ends with the establishment of the Don settlement and the Henson family's relocation there. Both the 1858 version and this 1876 version include additional chapters about trips to England and trips back into the United States South to help slaves escape. In addition to the material reprinted from the 1858 version, which the early chapters of this version almost exactly resemble, the 1976 version of Henson's autobiography contains 8 new chapters and 2 appendices, a verbal sketch of Harriet Beecher Stowe and an excerpt from a work called A Lost Continent by Joseph Cooper discussing the then ongoing sale of African slaves in Turkey, Egypt, Tunis, Morocco, and Madagascar. Perhaps the most significant of the added chapters is one in which Henson explains his relationship to Harriet Beecher Stowe and the characters in her novel. Henson notes that since the publication of Stowe's A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which she called Henson a parallel instance to the fictional character Uncle Tom, he has been called Uncle Tom, and feels proud of the title, and proud that his story may have, in any way, inspired that gifted lady to write the novel. p. 158. Henson goes on to give the real names of other Stowe characters and says that some were acquaintances of his and some very similar to people he had known while enslaved. p. 158. The 1876 version also includes an account of Henson's legal battles with an English gentleman, probably John Scobell, a white man and former secretary of the British and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society, who was the official administrative head of the Don community from 1852 to 1868. 165. Henson and Scobell increasingly disagreed as the community began to struggle financially, and Scobell sued Henson for payment on a personal loan, which created political rifts that led to the disintegration of the settlement. Winks, Blacks in Canada. 203. Henson adds a short section about his second marriage to a widow from Boston who had been brought up in Baltimore as a free black woman. Another section briefly describes the lives of 8 of his children, all from his first marriage, 7 of whom are still living in 1876. pp. 197-99. The autobiography concludes with a report of Henson's third and final trip to England and his speaking engagements there. Works consulted: Doyle, Sister Mary Ellen, Josiah Henson's Narrative, Before and After, Negro American Literature Forum 8.1, Spring 1974, 176-182, Mrs. Stowe's, Uncle Tom, Daily Globe, Street. Paul, Minnesota, May 11, 1883, p. 3, available from Chronicling America, Historic American Newspapers, Access July 16, 2010.